do you do, everybody? Welcome to Mish Men. This is, I believe, episode 2.
Episode 2.
And we're going to call it 2. We had an intro. One was that fantastic episode. I think it was last week, wasn't it, Dustin?
Last week.
Where we talked about, and our clothes might look the same. It just happened to work out that way.
I'm dirty. I wear the same clothes day after day. So.
We never left.
Yeah. We just
slept here on the table. But welcome to Mish Men. I am Adam Mauser, and to my right is
Dusty Labar.
And we are the Mish Men, and we are going to talk a little bit today about trusting robots.
Trusting robots.
Yeah, and the subtitle of it is really automation bias, and what is it, and what's this all about? So, Dusty, what is automation?
Automation. So this is Dusty's uneducated talk. So I'm hoping that you're going to be able to inform me.
Well, I was educated on Wikipedia. So
okay. Well, Wikipedia is pretty good.
Yeah, it's the best.
Most of my college essays were from Wikipedia. Automation. So I'm going to use Ford Motor Company as what I think automation is. So we started building cars and it was super slow. And then somebody figured out that, hey, we can automate some robots and they will make the cars exponentially faster. And we can drop the pricing. We can create things a lot faster. We can have a higher demand and sell a lot more if we have this automated things. And I think that probably spans more than Ford, just as I know that was like one of the first big things that Ford did.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. So I looked up the definition, and it is execution by a system, a computer app or machine or something like that, of a function previously carried out by a human. So along the lines of exactly what you're talking about, you're going to automate something. Most people think of like the technical, like today's automation.
Sure.
But I think, and this is where I'm going to take a little liberty, there are other things that have been automated before we had computers.
Sure.
Some of the examples I could think of, and again, this might not be the strict letter of the law, but if a function performed by a human before was writing, like writing out in script, and then Johann Gutenberg with the printing press, the movable type printing press.
So that was something you would consider automation, even
in a very loose sense.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah,
that's fair.
Because now I'm not writing out,
right,
like a human, but I can take and I can mass produce.
Okay.
And it's more on the mass production side, kind of like Ford, what he did with his assembly line.
Sure.
He didn't come up with that idea, but
so before there was printing presses, did they have newspapers still, and it was just handwritten?
Well, they had a lot. There were presses before.
Okay.
But this was a movable type printing press.
I understand.
So he took, he had a cache of letters.
I understand.
Of the alphabet, and then you could array them in whatever you needed to, print out several pages of that particular thing, and then reset the type, print out his next page, and on it goes.
Gotcha. Okay. So there was a press. It was just significantly slower, and still, it was probably man-operated, one person just like, and then here's the page, and then they would have to reassemble it somehow.
Right. They'd have to collate it later.
Gotcha. What a nightmare. God.
Well, but better than writing.
Sure.
Because in the old days, you just had script writers just writing.
Just writing. This is much better.
Some other things like the steam engine. Now we're taking things that wasn't performed by a human so much, but we're moving things and we're automating movement.
Okay.
Gatling gun. That's another automated feature where I'm not reloading the gun. The gun is loaded automatically through a crank.
Yep.
So again, these are loose.
So would you consider the first like revolver to be trust and automation as well?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So the first gun that would rotate through multiple rounds without you having to reload it.
And it's very generic and loose term of automation.
Yeah. Well, sure, but still automation. You didn't have to worry about reloading every time. You're trusting in the thing to do it for you, basically.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I'm not having to rechamber a load because I've already chambered it.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So there's some good example, but you brought up the industrial robot.
Yeah.
Through the example Ford, and then there was in 1968 the Unimate. It was a robot that was installed at a GM plant.
Okay.
And where it automated features, and if you think about it, what I want to automate are things that are routine, things that can be repeated, and I want to increase the quality and have fewer errors.
Mm-hmm.
And I want it to be done the same every time. But now I'm going to remove the human from the loop. If you were to think of a function, a control loop of I do a function and I get feedback on how I did by looking at it,
right,
or have an inspector look at it and I move on. Well, now I remove the human from that loop and I'm automating that.
Right.
And so that was done through some rudimentary software and robotics in 1968.
So tying that into the same thing. So we have these car companies that can do, mass produce many automobiles, which has, I guess as a question what you think about it. So like somebody like Lamborghini will literally be like, if you wanted to buy this car, it is so much money because it's handcrafted.
Right.
So like it went from like, this is amazing, like this is awesome that we can do it, but now people are like, well, we still are building them by hand, which makes them exponentially more expensive now because so you have like that side of things. So people are like, you can get your car fast or you can get it for a lot more money handcrafted by a human being, which the original intent was to take human beings out of the equation because we can do it faster.
Right.
So it's just like an interesting side of things, because now you're talking like millions of dollars for a vehicle because it's handcrafted in Italy versus manufactured 1,000 at a time in Detroit.
That's exactly right, and you're talking about the economic impact or the economic facet of automation, to where so you have that scale of a Lamborghini aircraft automobile.
Yeah.
That now I'm going to take, and I have these craftsmen that are building the aircraft literally by hand.
Right.
So the quality is because he's going to hire craftsmen, he can charge a lot more, and that's a whole class of goods called Veblen goods.
Veblen,
Veblen, I think is what it is. And Veblen goods are goods that are, this isn't really directly related to automation, but it's still interesting.
Yeah.
A Veblen good are goods that are priced outside the normal market for, let's say, cars or watches. That's a great example.
Okay.
I can buy a timepiece for my phone, which is not cheap, but it does many other functions, and the clock function is relatively cheap compared to it just comes free, the clock function.
Sure.
Or I can buy, a $20,000 Rolex.
Right.
$20,000 Rolex is a Veblen good, and because it's the name of it carries more cachet than the fact that it's a clock.
Interesting.
Or a watch.
I've never heard the term Veblen good.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Well, welcome to Mishmash.
Mishmash, man.
I just unplugged.
Your headphone?
And I'm back.
And he's back.
So so that was our first blooper.
We should run it on a loop.
Yeah. So anyway, Veblen goods, interesting topic. So another facet with that robot is the advent of software. And software, a lot of times you think of software as like this strange code. There's usually a software programming language. That's usually a high-level thing. But eventually it has to get down to an executable code or machine code, where now I'm writing to the processor. And that's strictly the binaries where I'm going to tell the processor what to do, what math operations to execute in order to do whatever function I'm going to do.
Makes sense.
And so the introduction of software and computers now proliferating, we can automate a lot more things.
Right.
And to tie back in a little bit to what we're just talking about and the economic impacts. If you think of the minimum wage, the minimum wage continues to rise, and I will offer that the minimum wage is truly zero.
Okay.
It is never whatever the government says it is.
Okay.
Because if the minimum wage comes up and I'm a business and I only have so much revenue coming in, I can only pay so many employees based off of that minimum wage. Well, now I'm going to have to let some people go, or I won't be able to hire as those that are in my business attrit. So I'm going to replace it with, let's say, McDonald's, where they have those kiosks where you order your food.
Which is something new that I just saw like recently, because I don't go to fast food very often, but I recently was in a McDonald's. Why the heck was I in there? Doesn't matter.
Maybe to buy food.
I bet you it was not. I almost guarantee you I went to use a bathroom.
Okay, that's fair.
God, I love chicken nuggets, but I didn't get them that time. But I walked in and I was like, did we just give a high school kid's job away to this kiosk?
Yes, we did.
And it's because of the minimum wage, you think? Because
without a doubt.
It's because it's too expensive. But this computer can do what this kid does.
Right.
And you're basically ordering your own food. You're telling us what to do, and we can fire Jim, who's an 18-year-old kid in high school,
right?
And we don't have to pay anybody.
You don't have to pay anybody.
I didn't really put much stock into it when I walked in there, except for the fact that everybody's getting lazy and they didn't want to hire, whatever.
Yeah.
But it makes total sense that if you're like, when McDonald's could hire people 10 years ago for what, $6 an hour or whatever it was, $7 an hour, and now it's well over double.
Yeah.
And so, but you're talking to a kid that's going to run a cash register and probably call off work most days, and
right.
And now you're like, well, maybe this computer can do it better.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
And it takes longer because you can communicate in words a lot quicker. He knows this 18-year-old kid, even if he's a marginal employee, he can put in the codes if he's somewhat trained and efficient.
Yeah.
But now, because the automation can't determine, it has to give all the options all the time as you go down.
Makes sense.
Otherwise, the customer won't get what they want.
You can't get truly customizable food. So like you have to have pickles, onions, blah, 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 blah. And you have to go through that list every time. As a consumer.
Yeah. So it's more painful, but if you want the price low, you're willing to deal with that.
Can I ask you a question? This is a
Absolutely.
personal question. You go into Publix. It's 5:00 on a Friday. Do you aim for a regular checkout with a person, or do you go for the automated checkout?
If I just have a couple things, then I will go to the automated checkout if I can.
There's definitely a limit to how many things that you have that you're willing to bag yourself, right?
Yeah.
There's definitely a limit where you're like, I'm going to wait this line.
Or if there's complication, if there's something that needs weighed.
That's right. Yeah. Or if you're getting alcohol and they're going to ask for your ID,
right?
Because that person's not paying attention.
No.
Or they're going to ask you if you want to donate to some organization.
Right.
Like, I don't got time for this. But yeah, I am 100%. If I can go to the self checkout, I'm going to the self checkout, which is really funny because Bill Burr, this comedian, does a joke about that where he's like, they're basically saying, you pick out your food, you pay for it, you get the F out of my store, is basically what they're saying, because you're not doing a human interaction. But, there's some times where you just want to be like, I don't feel like talking. I just want to run my stuff through and get out.
Right. I just want to get out.
Yeah.
In fact, I've seen memes on this, and I have found myself, I actually did this, but I'll ask you the question.
Mm-hmm.
You pull up to the gas pump.
Yep.
And you get out.
Yeah.
And it says, hey, it's card reader's broken. You're going to have to go inside.
Yeah.
Do you go inside, or you just get in your car and leave?
Never. I never go inside.
Yeah.
When I tell you that I never go inside, I will try every different pump before I leave that, but I will not go inside.
I will push my car to the next gas station.
100%.
I'll call it, hey, Dusty, can you pick me up? Here's the deal.
You know how mad I get when it says, go see the cashier? I'm like, you got to be out of your mind.
Yeah. That's impossible.
Even if I was planning on going into the gas station to buy something else, I'm like, you don't tell me what to do. I want to pump my gas now, go in and buy my stuff, and then walk out.
I don't trust those robots.
Yeah, this is ridiculous. I'm 100%. In Jersey, they still have, you can't pump your own gas there.
I've driven through Jersey, and I've seen it.
Yeah, it's stupid.
It is.
It's stupid. I don't know. I think it's to thwart theft, but.
I think it's a union thing.
You think it's a union
thing?
Yeah. Oh, godly unions. My uncle was a union, heavy machine operator in the union, and I mean, he was a certain kind of way.
Yeah.
He was a certain kind of way.
I remember growing up where the pay at the pump was like, you would have to go inside.
Yeah.
And they had like self-serve and full-serve lanes. And I remember that going, my mom and dad getting gas and the full-service guy.
Yeah. Wash your window.
Yeah. Check your oil, all of it.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So that's software, that automated logic. And if you just think of software as logic, that's helpful. It's just a flow chart. If this, then that. If this, then that.
Mm-hmm.
And on down. It just executes. So we had a lot of things getting automated, including like in your truck, you probably have an electronic transmission.
Yep.
And it's not that automatic transmission was based off of, the velocity. It was based off of a number of factors, the RPM of the engine,
right.
A number of things, and pressure. Pressure was the regulator that defined all that. Well, now we have this electronic transmission that can add a little more fidelity to it. Mm-hmm. An aircraft, they have this thing that's been around for years and years and years. It's called a FADEC, fully automated digital electronic control unit. So that's a FADEC engine. It takes a ton of parameters in it, and it's usually two computers in one.
Mm-hmm.
So it's split down the middle. So you have two processors inside one engine, and it's just still one module.
Gotcha.
But it's processing, and it's taking all those inputs, a lot of them independent and redundant,
mm-hmm.
and it modulates the engine based off of need.
Okay.
And expected need. And so all that stuff's automated, and it removes the human from the loop. So the point of it is you need less training.
Yeah.
You can respond to things much quicker than a human can in
Sure.
a lot of cases because my attention's diverted to wherever.
So I hate to interrupt you again.
No, go ahead.
So, for instance, the Tesla. So Tesla does not have a transmission. You get instant power to the wheels, whatever you need. And they also have an in some of the models an autopilot function. So basically, do you think that within the next X amount of years that there's no need to have your driver's license if your car drives for you?
Right.
So is that going to remove the human from the loop of ever driving again? Like if your Tesla can take you to point A to point B, you never have to drive it. It does exactly what you want it to do all the time. Is that just removing the person from the loop, which would be like the driver? You're just riding a vehicle, just like a bus, except it's your own personal. If you have the money to buy the vehicle, you can drive regardless of your license or not.
Well, that's exactly what this whole topic is about, is that trust in automation. And the designer has to be right all the time. I think we're going to get there eventually.
Sure, I agree.
I mean, it's inevitable, but there's a lot of growing pains along the way.
Yeah.
There is a certain acceptance of that technology that the population will have to absorb and accept.
Mm-hmm.
But that takes time.
Sure.
That takes time.
Yeah.
But there are some things that have to be accounted for, and there are things that we as consumers or users, or maybe even a type of operator, like a passive operator in an automobile that drives itself, that we have to be prepared to jump in. And we're going to talk about that here shortly. Okay. So automation bias, that's the tendency to trust or favor suggestions from an automated decision-making system. And that's really the kernel of what we're talking about. So what I want you to think of is a GPS. Now, the former GPS was something the military developed, and it's satellite-aided navigation system. So you have a series of satellites that are geolocated throughout the globe and orbit, and it gives information through triangulation of your location as long as you have an antenna and a processor that says, okay, here's where you are.
Okay, so when GPS came out, as not you as somebody that was in the military, but as when GPS came out for the consumer, I remember very vividly, my mom bought my dad a GPS, and he couldn't trust that thing less. So they would put it on in the car, and he would defiantly not listen to it, whether it took him longer to get where he was going or not.
Right.
But it was like, turn left here, and he's like, that's not the way I go here. So it doesn't matter if it took him 25 minutes longer. He'd be like, this thing is not telling me where to go. So that's really what we're talking about, right? Like he had no trust in that at all. He was like, he grew up in this generation, and he was like, I don't trust any of this stuff. And it took him probably 10 years before he would even be like, okay, I'm just going to put it in the GPS and let it go. So were you somebody that was like, I'm not listening to this, I know what I'm doing? Or because you had probably had experienced it before the public? Did you have experience with it before the public?
I did. I operated a GPS. This is before I even flew, but we had it was called a plugger or a slugger. I can't remember what it stood for or what it means, but it was a hand portable GPS.
Okay.
And I was a ground infantryman, and so in the old days, you had your compass and you had your topographical map essentially in military grade reference system, and you're literally counting paces. Like I have it at 72 for every 100 meters. I take 72 paces.
Oh boy!
So 2 steps is 1 pace.
Okay.
And 72 for 100 in this type of terrain, and 70 for this type of terrain, and 78 and like the jungles of Panama.
Okay.
And so you know that, and so you can kind of pace it. You're comparing to the map. You got your Linset compass, so you know where magnetic north is, and you can try to figure out where you are based off of just observing. Well, now you have this GPS, and it automates that, and you don't have to be as observant of where you are. Now, initially, we would just we do our walking, and it would confirm where we were, or say, hey, we might be off a little bit because this thing's saying over here.
Okay.
Because it would give you the coordinates of where you were.
Gotcha.
So I had that advantage before GPSs were a thing in the consumer world.
Yeah.
And I think it was 93. I think I wrote it down here. But anyway, it was the early 90s. Clinton signed a law to release GPS, not the full GPS, because you can be more accurate with the military encoded GPS. But now we can have on our phones. We can have Garmin's or Magellan's. I can't remember the couple other brands of GPS. And then now they're on everybody's phone. But that observant nature that we had when we were navigating by knowing where magnetic north was, counting paces, looking at the terrain, or if I'm driving, or in your dad's instance.
Yeah.
He knew where he wanted to go. He's been on these roads before. Let's say he's going to go cross country. He would map out and recon where he needed to go.
Right.
And well, now I don't even do this anymore. Even though I grew up, that's how I had to drive.
Sure.
Like I need to drive to upstate New York. Well,
Okay.
I'd get out a map and an
Have to have a
atlas,
map. Yeah.
and I'd flip through and like, okay, I'm gonna take 71 up to 90, take 90 to 81, and there we go. And I'm looking at the signs and I'm keeping track.
Right.
Well, now I just pull up my phone.
Yeah.
But what if something's wrong?
You're right.
What if I put in the wrong city? What if I put in Madison, Wisconsin,
Sure.
or instead of Madison, Alabama? What if I lose GPS signal? What if I fat finger the wrong city in and I don't notice it?
Right.
That happens quite a bit.
Sure.
Or another type of error is a road gets washed out or a bridge gets washed out. Well, now what do I do? Because I might end up in a bad spot.
Right.
And I need to keep track of where I am. If I don't know where I am, then I'm in worse shape than I was.
Yeah. The problem is that because like if there was a bridge washed out or a road closed, it's not that necessarily the GPS would know it. It's that you've done no prior research to know how to get around it if that was the issue. So like when you put it into your GPS, you're like, I don't even know where I am. I have no signal. I just have to guess on roads because nobody carries a map of them anymore.
Yeah.
So that's a huge problem. Just in general, because you're right. People just put in the coordinates, and if they lose signal, they're pretty much lost.
They are lost.
I mean, they can't get to where they're going for sure.
Because they haven't done it. I'll say we, because I'm lumping myself in this. We haven't done any research beforehand to know where we could be
Right.
if things went haywire.
Correct.
So that all boils down to like regression. If this fails, then now what?
Right.
So next area I'm going to talk about related to this is these two gentlemen. They were both, I think, industrial engineers at the beginning of the early 1900s, so the beginning of the 20th century. Yerkes and Dotson, Yerkes and Dotson. And they came up with a saying called the Yerkes-Dotson law.
Okay.
And I'm going to describe it to you, but if you think of it as an XY plot, and on the Y-axis, the one that goes vertical, that's task performance,
Okay.
like how well you can perform a task.
Okay.
And along the X-axis is stimulus.
Okay.
Or state of arousal, how close you're paying attention to what it is that you're doing. So performance against stimulus or arousal, where you are. Well, there's cutoffs to that. If I automate something, then let me back up. So it's a nice bell-shaped curve that illustrates your performance. So I can be understimulated. In my GPS, I'm just barely paying attention to where I'm at. I'm just listening to what the guy's saying.
Right.
Or I could be overstimulated. There's a kid crying in the back. There's your wife's asking, like, hey, why don't you just ask for directions?
Gotcha.
Et cetera, et cetera. And it's just a lot of input, and you can't sort and filter a lot of that stuff out. So you're overstimulated. Your task performance is going to suffer as a result. I'll equate it to flying because I've done some flying in the past. And there's a lot of radios. You can have 5, maybe 6, maybe even some type of aircraft, 7 radios going all at once potentially. Not likely, but you got a lot of radios and a lot of people talking to you about different things. And you might be getting shot at. And you got to navigate. And you got to go perform this function, this mission. You're not just flying for fun. So there's a lot of stimulus. And there could be stimulus in the cockpit, behind you, in front of you, outside the aircraft, through the radios, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it's important to be able to shed some of that stuff. But what Yerkes-Dotson described was there's a limit to where your task performance suffers significantly, that performance along the Y-axis. And then there's a cutoff where I might fall asleep.
Okay.
Or I might be so distracted I don't pay attention to what's going on.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember this, but several years ago, 5, 10, somewhere in that neighborhood, there was a commercial airliner that the pilots overflew their destination by like 150 miles.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And it was
it
someplace
Spirit?
I can't remember what airline
I
it
bet
was.
it was Spirit.
It very well could have. It could have been any one of them, though.
Yeah.
Because now what they said was they were on their computers or something like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter. They failed to do what they should do,
Right.
and they were let go. And 150 miles, that sounds like a lot, but when you're doing 300-400 knots,
Yeah.
it's not that long. It's like 15 minutes maybe.
Yeah.
But still, they overflew their destination, and it's because they were at that far left side where the arousal was like, I'm just not paying attention to what's going on.
Gotcha.
And they didn't hear the cues that told them, hey, you need to descend here. And people, they were talking to them on like the guard or emergency frequencies.
Gotcha.
So that I think they were asleep.
Sure. One of them nodded off, and the other one was like,
Yeah,
I got controls.
yeah, and he dozed off.
Gotcha.
That's just my opinion.
Sure.
So at any rate, they were understimulated for the task at hand.
Mm-hmm.
So there's those two cutoffs. I'm overstimulated, I'm understimulated. And then there's that meaty part of the curve where most of us need to be all the time. And it's best when you're designing a system that when things start to fail, that you are still somewhere in there.
Gotcha.
So in aviation, that's a field I've been in for a couple of decades. And doing a lot of test work, we try to design a system to where it gracefully degrades and to where it keeps you in that middle part.
Gotcha.
To where if something fails, a sensor fails, you're going to be alerted, but it's not going to be a complete showstopper.
Gotcha.
And you want to try to keep that guy or gal that's flying the aircraft in that meaty part of the curve where they can pay attention to what's going on.
Makes sense.
So those failures that I was talking about, that's what feeds into the design of a system. But that also, like your dad, and I'm kind of like this on some things, and I think we all are. There's a technology that we're used to doing work on whatever it is. In his case, driving from point A to point B. The technology was such that he's comfortable with doing whatever it is he's going to do, and he doesn't want that to change. Right. But then there's another sweet spot of people that like, yeah, give me that technology. I want to just do that, but I'm not going to do any of that. So we need to be prepared for that. So one of the things you talked about was the Tesla, the auto-driving cars.
Sure.
And one of the things that I found interesting, I saw an ad for this. There was a manufacturer of a car, popular manufacturer, and they had an automatic braking and steering for, let's say, a ball and a kid that runs out in front of the car.
Okay.
So this design feature is such that it senses it through this called bumper radar. And it would brake the car and then turn to avoid that object, whatever it is. It just intruded into the flight path or the driving path,
Right.
Of the car. So can you see any problems with that?
I mean, if it's not a kid with a ball and just anything, and it makes you swerve off path for not a good reason, you could swerve off into traffic or into something.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be, it could have been a goat that ran in front of you.
Sure.
But then it's going to swerve into a path where a baby pushing a stroller.
Right,
now,
right.
Like the human can immediately sense that before any sensor and any computer can do it and know that, well, the goat is going to die.
Yeah.
I'm going to kill the goat.
If you have a lady pushing her baby in a stroller to your left and a goat to your right and you're hitting one of them,
right,
even in an instant you can be like, well, that goat is out.
Right.
But the computer, it just has an object that's in front of it. It has to make a decision. So whatever, I guess I would assume whatever the first object is, it moves away from that one, which could potentially hit something worse.
And even if I don't know that that's a baby that's in the stroller that the woman's pushing.
Yeah.
Or even if it's not even a woman pushing the stroller, it's just a stroller in the road.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess that there's a baby in that thing.
Sure.
And the goat's going to die.
Yeah. The computer will not guess that there might be a baby
does not.
in that. Yeah.
It does not. So you automate things, but it doesn't always account for those things that we can recognize and make a value judgment off of that.
I think that's some of the issues that they're having with the autopilot function of the Teslas is that it's certain they're causing wrecks for reasons that they shouldn't be. Like, does your car have that a smart cruise or so like
that lane adjustment?
Yeah, so like it'll pick up if somebody's merging, it'll pick up that person's there, but not in your way. So that person's getting off the highway, but it picks up their deceleration and moves and is moving off, but it picks that deceleration up. So it'll slow your car down to whatever they're doing. But that person behind you is looking up front and being like, oh, that person's just merging, but your car slows down because it's only picking up the slowing speed and you're getting closer to that car.
And potentially the brake lights because they use light sensors as well.
Right. So, I mean, that's always the stuff that I'm worried about, even with the smart cruise that we have in our trucks, is that if I see somebody merging, I always tap the brake or turn it off because I know it's going to slow me down. And if somebody's riding my butt, if they may not have it. It's not in every car. So their car might not slow down automatically. They may be on their cell phone. So I try to, be aware of the people behind me, which is something that smart cruise or autopilot can't do.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So back to the Tesla question, and just kind of flesh this out a little bit. Sure, you can. Real quick on that. So years ago, just a quick anecdote. A friend of mine, this is when I was in the Army, and so there's this casualty assistance duty that you have to have if a soldier dies, whether it's combat related, doesn't really matter. There are people and staff that like literally show up to the doorstep to inform.
Sure. Yep.
And this guy, he had to inform. So he was privy to the details. And what happened was, someone else was driving a car. A raccoon ran out into the road, and the person that was driving elected to avoid to hit the raccoon and drove into the other lane and hit this other person dead on.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine that. I mean, literally, I just ran over an armadillo a couple months ago with my son in the back. And because there was cars coming the other way, there was a ditch on the other side. So I'm like, hey, get ready.
Yep.
And, I hate it for the armadillo, but when it comes to armadillo and me and my son, or me and my son and some other people.
Human life,
We
do this. I mean, the same thing happened literally me driving here today. There was a squirrel that ran out in front of me. I didn't want to hit the squirrel, but there was somebody coming the other lane, and I'm not going to be like, well, let's try to save the squirrel. I'm like, well, I'm going to preserve my life and this person's life, and that's kind of like, exactly what we're talking about there. Like that, there's that human instinct or human ability to see what's going on at a different level than a computer can see what's going on.
Right.
Versus, there's a hierarchy of what's going to happen, and we can decide that, versus where robots or automation can't do that yet, which I don't know if they will be able to do, but they can't do it yet.
The hard part is programming for every variable and every eventuality.
Sure.
And thinking that I've done a lot of automation work when it comes to flight control law development, automation of things in cockpits where there's a human in the loop, and you need to convey information to that human, and you need to prepare for failures and that sort of thing. There's a lot of discussion, a lot of good research on it, but what it boils down to is you can't always trust exclusively that what you're presented, and there's a bias toward trusting something that's automated. That's always there.
So I also think that generationally, so my dad was afraid to listen to GPSs. Like, he was not going to take its information. He was going to do whatever he wanted to do. Versus my generation, where I'll implicitly trust a GPS on my phone. Like, it knows all. I can do it, which even Andrew, who's 10 years younger than me, where even like today, a couple weeks ago, he set up our which is like kind of foreign to me. It almost makes you nervous. You're like, I'm not exactly sure how to do it, but he's so confident because he grew up in a different time than even I did. 10 years difference in this technology boom. So like what I'm thinking is my daughter, when she's in her 20s, the trust in automation will be crazy because she's going to grow up in a time where we pretty much trust it now in a lot of aspects of our life. So pretty much as we go through for every decade, we're going to have more and more trust in it as we go through. There's going to be less of people like my dad, me, all these people that are like, oh, some of it's good, some of it's bad, to where it's like, oh, it's just easy if everything is just done kind of thing.
Well, it's, just like you said, it's a generational or just a continual spectrum of more and more things are automated every day. And where you enter into that stream of wherever we are at the current state, you're willing to accept that because it's just the way life is.
The way it is, yeah.
But if there was some, let's say an electromagnetic pulse, and it takes out every electronic device, anything that's wired and that's on, it's now gone.
Yeah.
Well, we better get pretty good at growing our own food,
right?
And walking.
Yeah,
and maybe taming a horse and riding a horse. All those sorts of things we would have to be much better at. Producing heat, all those kinds of things, to where, and that's the warning is don't always jump in full force when it comes to the things that you should be responsible for, which is your own life, limb, or eyesight, and others around you when you're operating this equipment, including a car, which could hurt you.
You know what's crazy is that Laura, my wife, for those of you, if you're a first-time listener, she will not press go on GPS. So she'll hit route. It'll show her the blue route, and it drives me crazy when I'm driving, but she'll zoom in It's the way her dad is. It's the way her brother is.
That's funny.
But she'll zoom in and she won't pick another route. She'll just zoom in and be like, oh, this road right here will take you here. And her brother is like very intelligent. He's a farmer. He took over a farm, and just a super smart dude. And that's the way he is. That's the way her dad is. And so she won't hit go on a GPS. She'll see the route it wants her to take, and she'll blow it up, and she'll see what other options she can have, and she'll just kind of navigate. Even when she's telling me directions, I can see her on her phone, like zooming in. Oh, in 1, 2, 3, 4 streets ahead, you can take a right. And like, I'm like sweating because, we're trying to get somewhere, and I'm like, oh my God, just press go. Just press go so we can see it. But that's like I get mad at it, but that's a skill. Basically, it's reading a map. Yeah. I mean, she's essentially reading a digital map. So if I opened up a map for her, she could read the map pretty easily because she's doing it on her phone. She's not trusting the GPS.
Right.
She's learning it herself. Not that she wouldn't. She's just being like, this is what I like to do.
And it's not a bad idea.
It's not.
In fact, I'll do that in this area. I just like, okay, which is the quickest way based off of traffic? Because
Sure.
it also gives feedback on cell phone pings.
Yeah.
And if there's a traffic jam.
Yes, correct.
But then I'm like, okay, I'm going to go that way. And then I shut off because I can't stand the constant reminders.
Yeah.
Turn left.
All of
turn
my
left.
stuff is turned off because I can't take it. Like
Yeah.
with work, I'll have it on to my destination just so I can see if there's traffic jams. I know where I'm going. I'm not even looking at it. But
Yeah.
I'll look down and be like, oh, is there a traffic jam ahead?
Right.
Knowing that 72 at 4 o'clock on a Friday is going to be a nightmare. I may want to jump off. So
They need to automate that.
they do need to automate that. Although Todd Slyman had an idea, and he told Madison to do it this way 20 years ago, and they still haven't done it. And also the mailboxes.
The mailboxes,
So,
that's another thing.
We should do an episode on the U.S. Postal Service. And we should have Todd in as a guest.
That would be a riot.
That would be so fun.
Well, that is, any questions?
No, I don't think I have any questions. I'm interested now that we talked about it a little more, I'm really intrigued by people's ability to trust it now, because I never thought about it like that. Like somebody's trust in it. It's like you have this technology, so you just use it. The same way when I would argue with my dad, I'd be like, you just have the technology, just use it. So like, this is one of my favorite driving stories with my dad is we went to Rehoboth Beach, Delaware from Pennsylvania every year for vacation in the summer for as long as I can remember. Maybe once or twice a year we would go, or once or twice, every couple of years we go somewhere different, but mostly we went to Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. So he knew how to get there. Easy. He didn't have to look at a map. But if the GPS told him to go a certain way, he would ignore it.
Yeah.
And then it would literally, my mom called me, it was like, it took us 6 hours this year because the GPS kept telling your dad to turn somewhere, and he said that was wrong. And
Why did he even turn it on?
My mom wanted it on.
Oh, okay.
So he was like, that's not the right way. So he just kept saying no, which is so funny because he knew it was on, and he's been there 100 times. He knew where it was. He knew how to get there. But his trust in technology was so low that he'd be like, even if it's telling me to go the way that I usually go, I don't believe it, and I'm going to go a different way.
That's
that I think
hilarious.
is right. So like that kind of stuff is, and the same thing with me, like this technology that Andrew has.
Yeah.
I could figure it out, but he's just so like, he trusts it so much. Like he knows what to do. He knows what to do. It's just like a generational thing. So that's a way that I never really looked at it. It was just kind of a joke. Like, every generation gets a little more comfortable with technology, and as you move down the line, but it really is a trust in it. Like, people that were born my dad was born in the 40s. So people born in that generation have a different view of technology than maybe somebody that was born in the 60s,
Definitely.
and the 70s, and the 80s, and now the 90s and the 2000s. So when you look at it, you're just like, oh, these kids grew up with it. But it's really, yes, they grew up with it, but they implicitly trust in what that technology is giving them, which is very interesting. It's not necessarily that they grew up with it, which they did. It's just that they trust it, which is fascinating to me because you can there's definitely people out there right now that are driving cars that have never even opened a map because they've always had Apple Maps. So they've never even opened one. Like a paper copy to them is useless.
The idea of an atlas that you keep in your closet, or a map of those big fold up maps.
Yeah,
it was like a comedian's joke about fold up maps that just like explode.
Because you had to that was in your car 100%.
Yeah.
20 years ago, if you went on a road trip, even if you knew where you were going, that map was in your car 100%. It was one of the necessities: a flashlight, a blanket, and a map, because you had to know where you were going. Well, now it's just like,
what do you need that for?
What do you need it for? I have my phone. My car tells me how many miles it is to empty.
Right.
Like I'm good to go. Which that is probably a trust and automation thing.
Yeah, it is.
How many miles to empty? Because people push that sucker to about the end.
And it's calculating that.
Yeah.
Is there's a lot of margin and like there's variation in all systems.
Mm-hmm.
And so to trust that, I don't trust things at all.
You know how many people I've heard say, my car said it had 18 miles left to go. It's like, do you know how many 18 miles? You had less than a gallon of gas in your car, and you were just like, this thing knows for sure.
Just sloshing around.
I mean, you could have been slightly parked at an angle that gave you the wrong thing. Like, I mean, it is.
Just the manufacturing variance of like where that sensor is and how it's measuring it, and it's just insane.
So I'm looking at cars right now for me and Laura. So like we have the new baby, and the Tacoma is not conducive to having a child. It's too small. So I'm looking at new vehicles, and the stuff that these cars have, like these new like 2023 cars, I mean, it's unbelievable. You see the heads up displays?
Yeah.
I mean, is there something more than trust and automation than the heads up display on your vehicle?
I'm kind of torn on heads up displays.
On your windshield?
Yeah.
It can't not cause more accidents, right? I mean, I know they're saying that you're looking down at the worst possible spot.
The trouble with my take on this, and there's some research on this, and I can't cite it right now, but there is a bandwidth limit to information you absorb through your eye.
Sure.
And so I've done some testing on this, but where I can have all available information presented to me in a heads-up display.
Yep.
Including a picture, including scenery that is now formed through sensors on the aircraft. Mm-hmm. And plus I have individual normally gauged information like airspeed, altitude, heading, that sort of thing. If I have all of that information, I have to do something with that.
Right.
I'm not consciously filtering it, but I still have to process it because it's still entering through my eye. It's processed by my brain to do something.
Right.
Now, I can train myself out of ignoring certain things, and that, generally speaking, happens. But when you get on that Yerkes-Dodson curve,
mm-hmm.
you get overstimulated.
Sure.
Your performance degrades.
Yeah, of course.
And so why do I need all of that information all the time? Why don't I get it as needed?
I think the best explanation of what you're saying, for those that don't understand, is when you're somewhere you don't know, you're watching your GPS, you just got a text message from your friend asking where you're at, and your mom is calling you.
Right.
Like you can't. Like,
and this podcast is on. You're playing the podcast,
and
it's riveting.
You can't. You're so tuned in that you can't. That's too many things coming in. Yeah. I know for 100. How many times? Maybe you not. But there'll be times when I'm listening to a podcast. That's all I'm focused on.
Yeah.
And I have my GPS on, and I'll miss a turn, and I'll be like,
yeah,
I missed the freaking turn. It's on my. I have Apple CarPlay in my truck. It's in my screen and my line of sight. And I'm so focused on one thing that I missed that turn, which is it's telling me what to do. So, I mean, that is like a legit thing. Like you can be overstimulated and miss that part of what you're trying to
do.
Yeah, that cue. So
next time that happens, think Yerkes-Dodson. Yerkes-Dodson.
I'm very interested by that.
Yeah, check it out. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. You, the listener, enjoyed this little dip into trust and automation bias, and the different types of automation. Dusty, I hope you enjoyed it.
I was very interested.
I found it riveting. I love this kind of stuff. I reached out to a human factors engineer to see if her name's Tia, and I'm going to send this to her. So hopefully this shout out goes to her, and this will increase our audience too.
Oh, good.
But Tia, thank you for this, for the papers that you sent. It was very informative. As you know, I find this kind of stuff kind of interesting because it's in my wheelhouse. It's what I do a lot of. So, but thank you all, M Cubed listeners, and we hope to see you next week.
Thanks, Adam. It was great.
Yeah.
See you guys next time. Bye.
Goodbye.